A rich man found a lost girl in the forest and took her to his mother's house, who has a disability. Thunder cracked across the darkened sky as Charles Harris stood at his study window, watching sheets of rain lash against the century-old glass of Harris Mansion. The storm had knocked out power throughout the estate, leaving only flickering candlelight to illuminate the room. As lightning flashed again, Charles caught his reflection in the window, a successful CEO at 45, yet his eyes held a weariness that no amount of wealth could cure. A sudden crash from upstairs shattered the relative quiet. "Barbara," he called out, but only thunder answered. Heart racing, Charles grabbed a flashlight and hurried toward the sound. The beam cut through darkness as he climbed the mansion's grand staircase, his footsteps muffled by thick carpet. The noise had come from his mother's music room. Sandra hadn't played in months, her mind increasingly lost to Alzheimer's. As Charles approached, he heard something that made him freeze piano keys, struck discordantly, as if by struggling hands. "Mom," he called softly, pushing open the heavy oak door. Lightning illuminated the room in stark bursts, revealing the grand piano where his mother had once composed beautiful melodies. But Sandra wasn't there. Instead, a dark figure bent over the piano, rifling through old sheet music with urgent movements. Before Charles could react, a child's scream pierced the air from down the hall Barbara's room. The figure's head snapped up, and in that instant of lightning, Charles caught a glimpse of a face he hadn't seen in decades, one he knew only from old photographs of Robert Mitchell. But it couldn't be. Robert Mitchell had vanished before Charles was born. The figure bolted toward the French doors leading to the balcony. Charles lunged forward, but his hand closed on empty air. As he reached the balcony, rain soaking through his expensive suit, the intruder had vanished into the storm. Barbara's screams continued. Charles ran to her room, finding the 9-year-old girl huddled in a corner, pointing at her window where another shadow moved against the rain. "They're coming for me," she sobbed. "Just like they came for Daddy." On her bed lay a single piece of sheet music, its edges worn with age. Written in his mother's familiar hand was a lullaby he'd never seen before. Titled "For My Son," scrawled across it in fresh ink, were 5 words that would change everything. "The truth will save them." Charles Harris stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office at Harris Enterprises, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a concrete kingdom. At 45, he had achieved everything society deemed successful. CEO of a multinational corporation, features in Fortune 500 magazines, and a bank account that could fund several lifetimes of luxury. Yet the reflection staring back at him from the glass told a different story. His salt and pepper hair, precisely cut and styled, matched his impeccably tailored suit, but beneath this polished exterior lay a man haunted by an emptiness he couldn't explain. The last rays of sunlight caught the heavy signet ring on his right hand, his father's ring, or rather the ring of Jonathan Harris, the man he had always believed to be his father. The office around him spoke of power and privilege. African mahogany desk, original artwork adorning the walls, awards and accolades displayed in tasteful glass cases. Each item carefully chosen to project an image of success and authority. But lately, these symbols of achievement felt more like props in an elaborate play where Charles was merely going through the motions. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, reminding him of his next board meeting. Charles straightened his tie, a gesture so habitual he barely noticed it anymore. The board meeting would discuss their latest acquisition, another smaller company to fold into the Harris Enterprises empire. It should have excited him, this latest victory, but instead it left a bitter taste in his mouth. The weight of maintaining his father's legacy pressed down on him like a physical burden. Jonathan Harris had built this company from the ground up, or so the story went. Every decision Charles made was measured against an impossible standard, the ghost of his father's achievements haunting every boardroom and corridor. At home, the sprawling Harris mansion felt more like a museum than a residence. Empty rooms echoed with memories of happier times, his mother's piano playing, family gatherings, laughter that had long since faded into silence. Now, the only sounds were his mother's confused mumblings as she drifted further into the fog of Alzheimer's and the efficient clicking of Mary's heels as she maintained the household with quiet dedication. Charles's phone buzzed another message from the nursing home his board members had recommended for his mother. He deleted it without reading. The idea of sending Sandra away, of abandoning her to strangers, was unthinkable. Even if she rarely recognized him now, even if her once brilliant mind could no longer hold on to the present, she was all the real family he had left. The success that surrounded him felt hollow, built on foundations he was beginning to question. Recent discoveries in the company's subsidiary operations had raised troubling questions: inconsistencies in international adoption agencies, questionable partnerships with child welfare organizations, money trails that disappeared into offshore accounts. Each thread he pulled threatened to unravel everything he had worked to maintain. His leather chair creaked as he leaned back, closing his eyes against the mounting headache. The position of CEO had fallen to him after his father's unexpected death 10 years ago. He had stepped into the role determined to prove himself worthy of the Harris name. Now, a decade later, that very name felt like a weight around his neck, dragging him into depths he feared to explore. The setting sun cast long shadows across his office, reminding him it was well past time to head home. Another evening awaited him in the echoing mansion, another night of attempting to connect with his mother during her increasingly rare moments of clarity, another silent dinner with only his thoughts for company. The loneliness of his position had never felt more acute. As Charles gathered his things to leave, his eye caught a framed photo on his desk, a younger version of himself with his parents. Sandra's smile beamed from behind the glass, her eyes bright with the spark that Alzheimer's had slowly dimmed. Jonathan stood proud and tall, a man whose approval Charles had spent a lifetime seeking. The photo had been taken at the company's 25th anniversary celebration, just months before Jonathan's death. Now, looking at it, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that even then, secrets had lurked beneath the surface of their perfect family portrait. The lights of his office dimmed automatically as he stepped out, another day ending just like all the others. But something was shifting inside him, a growing determination to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Little did he know, fate was about to hand him both the greatest challenge and the most precious gift of his life, in the form of a lost little girl who would help him rediscover what really mattered. In the west wing of Harris Mansion, Sandra Harris sat at her grand piano, her fingers hovering over the ivory keys as sunlight streamed through tall windows. Once renowned in the city's musical circles, she had composed scores that moved audiences to tears. Now, at 72, she struggled to remember the melodies that once flowed so naturally from her hands. The music room remained exactly as it had been in her prime, sheets of handwritten compositions carefully preserved in leather folders, awards and recognition plaques lining the walls, and photographs capturing moments from her celebrated career. But like her memories, these treasures were becoming strangers to her, their significance fading like watercolors in the rain. Today was one of her clearer days. She recognized the lullaby she had composed for Charles when he was born, though she couldn't quite recall which of the young men in the photographs on her piano was her son. The melody came to her in fragments, like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite fit together. Her fingers found the keys, playing the opening bars before faltering, the rest of the song lost in the fog that increasingly clouded her mind. Before Alzheimer's had begun its relentless advance, Sandra had been more than just a talented musician. She had run a prestigious music school, nurturing young talent and sharing her passion for composition. Her students had gone on to perform in concert halls worldwide, each carrying a piece of her teaching in their music. Now, the school continued under different leadership, her name gradually fading from its legacy. The disease had crept in slowly, at first forgotten appointments, misplaced items, the occasional confused conversation. Sandra had hidden it well, using her considerable intelligence to create elaborate systems of notes and reminders. But eventually, even these safeguards couldn't mask the truth. The day she forgot how to play Chopin's Nocturne, a piece she had performed thousands of times, was the day she could no longer deny what was happening. Mary appeared in the doorway, watching Sandra with a mixture of love and sadness. The housekeeper had been with the family for decades, witnessing Sandra's gradual decline. "Time for your medication, Mrs. Harris," she said gently. Sandra looked up, momentarily puzzled by the interruption of her thoughts. "Is Charles coming home today?" she asked, as she did nearly every day, regardless of whether she had just seen him hours before. Among the photographs on the piano was one that Sandra returned to often, though she couldn't always explain why. It showed a younger version of herself with a man whose face had been carefully removed from the image. On her clearer days, this photo stirred something in her memory, a mix of love, fear, and an urgent need to protect someone. But like so much else, the significance slipped away before she could grasp it. The most painful moments for those who loved her were when Sandra spoke of her music school as if it was still running, or asked about Jonathan as if he were alive, or failed to recognize Charles entirely. Yet there were also unexpected moments of grace, times when music broke through the fog, allowing her to connect with the world around her in ways that words no longer could. Her doctors had explained that musical memory often survived even as other memories faded. This cruel mercy meant Sandra could still play portions of her beloved compositions, even on days when she couldn't remember her own son's name. The piano became her anchor, the one constant in a world that increasingly made less sense. In her more lucid moments, Sandra was aware of what was happening to her. These were perhaps the hardest times, when she could feel her memories and abilities slipping away like water through her fingers. During these moments, she would sometimes speak of secrets that needed to be told, of truths that had been buried for too long. But before she could explain further, the clarity would fade, leaving those around her to wonder what important revelations remained locked in her failing mind. Despite everything the disease had taken from her, Sandra retained an innate gentleness and musicality that touched everyone around her. Even when words failed, her hands would often move in conductor's gestures, keeping time to music only she could hear. It was as if the essence of who she was, the musician, the teacher, the mother, remained intact, even as the details of her life blurred and faded. Mary Wilson moved through Harris Mansion with the quiet efficiency that had become her trademark over the past 30 years. Her starched uniform and practical shoes were as much a part of her identity as the carefully maintained mask of professional detachment she wore. At 60, her face bore the lines of someone who had carried heavy secrets for far too long, though few would notice beneath her perfectly composed expression. Every morning she followed the same routine, checking on Sandra first, ensuring medications were taken, then preparing Charles's breakfast, even though he rarely ate at home anymore. The mansion's pristine condition was a testament to her dedication, each room preserved as if frozen in time. But Mary's true role in the household went far beyond managing domestic affairs. Her position as housekeeper was a carefully crafted facade. Behind the servants' quarters' closed door, Mary kept meticulous records of everything that happened in and around the mansion. Photos, notes, surveillance reports, all carefully coded and hidden. She monitored the steady stream of threats that arrived disguised as business correspondence, intercepting them before they reached Charles. The security systems she had installed, under the guise of modern upgrades, would rival those of many government buildings. The weight of her true identity, Sandra's younger sister and Charles's aunt, pressed heavily on her conscience. Each time Charles treated her as just the hired help, each time she had to pretend not to recognize the significance of old family photos, a piece of her heart broke. But the pain was worth it to keep them safe. The powerful people who had forced her family into hiding all those years ago were still out there, still watching. Mary's past was a complex web of love, betrayal, and sacrifice. She had fallen in love with Robert Mitchell first, before he met Sandra. The pain of watching him fall in love with her sister had been almost unbearable. Yet when everything fell apart, when Robert disappeared and Sandra needed protection, Mary had set aside her own feelings to orchestrate their safety. Her connection with Jonathan Harris, the arrangement that would eventually save them all, had come at a terrible personal cost. The hardest part was watching Sandra's decline. As Alzheimer's slowly stole her sister's memories, Mary struggled with the temptation to reveal everything, to share the burden of truth before it was too late. But even in Sandra's confused state, the old dangers remained. Sometimes in her sister's clearer moments their eyes would meet, and Mary would see a flash of recognition, a shared understanding of all that remained unspoken between them. Her relationship with Charles was equally complex. She had watched him grow from an infant into the man he was today, unable to show the pride and love she felt as his aunt. Instead, she channeled her affection into small acts of care: his favorite meals appearing when he was stressed, a warm fire in his study on cold nights, fresh flowers in his mother's room. The distance required by her role as housekeeper was both a shield and a prison. The arrival of business correspondence each morning was a source of constant anxiety. Mary had learned to recognize the subtle signs of threats hidden in seemingly innocent messages. Her network of contacts, maintained over decades, helped her track potential dangers to the family. Each new business deal Charles made had to be carefully vetted, each new acquaintance thoroughly investigated. In her private moments, Mary allowed herself to remember the young woman she had been: passionate, ambitious, unafraid to love. The woman who had dreamed of a music career alongside her sister before fate and family obligations had forced her down a different path. Her own musical talents, nearly equal to Sandra's, remained hidden. Sometimes, late at night, she would play the piano in the servants' quarters, her fingers dancing over silent keys to avoid making sound. The medication schedule she maintained for Sandra was a daily reminder of what they had lost and what still remained at stake. Each pill represented another day of keeping their secrets, another day of maintaining the elaborate facade that had protected them for so long. Mary wondered, not for the first time, how much longer she could maintain this delicate balance before everything unraveled. Yet despite the burden of her secrets, Mary's dedication to the family never wavered. Every morning she donned her housekeeper's uniform like armor, ready to face another day of protecting those she loved from shadows they didn't even know existed. The truth, she knew, would eventually come to light. The only question was whether they would all survive its revelation. Harris Mansion stood as a testament to old money and carefully guarded secrets, its Victorian architecture rising imposingly against the backdrop of manicured grounds. Located in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, the estate sprawled across 5 acres, its wrought iron gates and stone walls keeping the outside world at bay. The building itself was a masterpiece of 19th-century craftsmanship, with its red brick facade, ornate cornices, and towering chimneys reaching toward the sky. Inside, the mansion's 3 stories contained over 20 rooms, each maintaining the delicate balance between historical preservation and modern luxury. The grand foyer, with its sweeping staircase and crystal chandelier, set the tone for the entire house. Original hardwood floors, restored to a warm gleam, stretched throughout the main level, their occasional creaks hinting at the age and stories contained within these walls. The heart of the mansion was Sandra's music room, occupying the entire west wing of the 2nd floor. Tall windows flooded the space with natural light, illuminating the grand piano that served as the room's centerpiece. Built-in bookshelves housed hundreds of music scores, some yellowed with age, others bearing Sandra's flowing handwriting. The room's acoustics had been specifically designed for musical performance, making every note played within its walls sound particularly poignant. The east wing housed Charles's private study, a masculine space dominated by dark woods and leather furniture. Here, family portraits hung alongside business accolades, creating an unintentional timeline of the Harris legacy. A hidden wall safe behind one such portrait contained documents whose significance would soon shake the foundation of everything Charles believed about his family. In contrast to these grand spaces, Mary's quarters in the servants' wing were modest but meticulously maintained. Her small sitting room doubled as a command center, where multiple security monitors disguised as ordinary electronics kept watch over the property. The basement below housed a climate-controlled room full of archived records and evidence, its existence unknown to even Charles. Across town, Harris Enterprises occupied the top floors of a gleaming skyscraper, its glass and steel architecture a stark contrast to the mansion's traditional elegance. The corporate offices exemplified modern luxury, with state-of-the-art technology and designer furniture creating an atmosphere of success and power. Charles's corner office on the 50th floor offered panoramic views of the city he'd helped build, though lately these views felt more like a reminder of the responsibility weighing on his shoulders. The boardroom, where major decisions affecting thousands of lives were made daily, featured a massive mahogany table that had witnessed decades of power plays and corporate maneuvering. Family photos of previous Harris generations lined the walls, their eyes seeming to judge each decision made within these walls. It was here that the company's darkest secrets were hidden beneath layers of corporate bureaucracy and carefully worded contracts. The corporate culture at Harris Enterprises reflected its public image: professional, competitive, and ruthlessly efficient. Employees moved through the building like well-oiled parts of a machine, each contributing to the company's reputation for excellence. Yet beneath this polished surface, whispers of questionable practices and ethical concerns had begun to circulate, particularly regarding the company's international adoption agency partnerships. The contrast between the mansion's old-world grandeur and the corporate tower's modern efficiency mirrored the dual nature of the Harris family itself, one foot in the past, bound by tradition and secrets, the other striding forward into a future built on potentially unstable ground. Both buildings served as fortresses in their own way, protecting their occupants, while simultaneously trapping them within walls of obligation and deception. In the neighborhoods surrounding both properties, the Harris name commanded respect and generated gossip in equal measure. Local charity events featured Charles as a prominent donor, while society columns speculated about his continued bachelor status and Sandra's declining health. The family's influence touched every aspect of city life, from the arts programs Sandra had once championed to the business deals that kept the economy thriving. Yet beyond this facade of wealth and influence, signs of change were appearing. Security cameras recently installed around the mansion's perimeter tracked increasing numbers of suspicious vehicles. Corporate rivals had begun probing into Harris Enterprises' overseas operations. Even the weather seemed to reflect the gathering storm, with more frequent rains casting shadows over both the mansion's aged stones and the corporation's reflective windows. The autumn evening that changed everything found Charles walking the wooded path behind Harris Mansion, seeking solace from another demanding day. Fallen leaves crunched beneath his Italian leather shoes as he wandered deeper into the forest, the setting sun casting long shadows between ancient oaks. The corporate world that consumed his days felt distant here, replaced by nature's quiet wisdom. A muffled sob broke through the evening stillness. Charles paused, listening intently. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of a child crying. Following the sound, he pushed through low-hanging branches until he came upon a small clearing. There, huddled against the trunk of a massive oak tree, sat a young girl no more than 9 years old. Her clothes, though clearly once well-made, were dirty and torn. Dark curls fell over her face as she hugged her knees to her chest, her small frame shaking with each sob. When she heard Charles approach, her head snapped up, revealing eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. She scrambled backward, pressing herself harder against the tree trunk. "It's all right," Charles said softly, crouching down to appear less intimidating. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Charles Harris." "What's yours?" He noticed bruises on her arms, telling a story of recent trauma that made his heart clench. "Barbara," she whispered after a long moment, her voice hoarse. Barbara Mitchell, the surname, sent an unexpected chill down Charles's spine, though he couldn't explain why. Are you lost, Barbara? Where are your parents? The question triggered a fresh wave of tears. They killed him, she choked out. They killed my daddy because he knew too much. He was trying to help those other kids, and they killed him for it. Charles moved closer, carefully, like approaching a wounded bird. What other kids, Barbara? What did your father know? Through broken sobs, Barbara's story emerged. Her father, Michael Mitchell, had been a dedicated social worker investigating a series of suspicious adoptions. He'd discovered something sinister: children disappearing from the system, money changing hands, documents falsified. The night everything changed, he'd rushed into Barbara's room, telling her they had to leave immediately. We drove all night, Barbara continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Daddy kept saying we just needed to reach someone who could help us. But then her voice cracked. Then those black cars came. Daddy tried to lose them, but they... She couldn't finish the sentence. I ran, she said after a moment. Daddy always said if something bad happened I should run and hide. So I ran into the woods. I've been hiding ever since. They're still looking for me. They want what Daddy found. Charles's mind raced. The mention of suspicious adoptions hit too close to home. He'd recently noticed irregularities in his company's international adoption agency partnerships. Could there be a connection? How long have you been out here, Barbara? 3 days, I think. I'm not sure anymore, she shivered, and Charles noticed the temperature had dropped with the setting sun. Listen, Barbara, he said gently, I have a big house just through these woods. It's safe there. We can get you warm, give you something to eat, and figure out how to help you. Would you like that? Barbara studied his face intently, with a wisdom beyond her years. Are you sure it's safe? They have people everywhere. Important people. I promise you'll be safe, Charles assured her, though something in her words unsettled him. I have a mother who lives there too. She used to be a musician. Maybe you'd like to meet her. At the mention of music, Barbara's face softened slightly. I used to sing in choir, she offered. Before. Charles stood slowly, extending his hand. Come on. Let's get you somewhere warm. As Barbara cautiously took his hand and stood on shaky legs, Charles felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. This child had survived something terrible, something that possibly connected to his own company. By offering her shelter, he was potentially making himself a target of whatever forces had killed her father. Looking down at her small hand in his, Charles knew none of that mattered. He had found this lost, broken child for a reason. Whatever came next, he would protect her. The evening Barbara first met Sandra was filled with an almost magical tension. Mary had cleaned the girl up, given her fresh clothes, and prepared a warm meal, all while maintaining her professional demeanor, despite obvious concern in her eyes. Now, as Charles led Barbara up the grand staircase toward the music room, a faint melody drifted through the hallway. That's my mother playing, Charles explained softly. She has good days and bad days. Sometimes she doesn't remember much, but she always remembers her music. He paused outside the music room's double doors, watching Barbara's reaction to the gentle notes floating through the wood. Inside, Sandra sat at the grand piano, her silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. Her fingers moved slowly but surely across the keys, playing a fragment of a lullaby she had composed decades ago. When Charles knocked gently on the doorframe, she turned, her eyes taking a moment to focus on the visitors. Mom, Charles said clearly, I'd like you to meet someone. This is Barbara. She'll be staying with us for a while. Sandra's usual confusion seemed to lift slightly as she noticed the small girl partially hidden behind her son. Barbara, she repeated, tasting the name. Do you like music, dear? Barbara stepped forward hesitantly. Yes, ma'am. I used to sing in choir with her voice caught, the memory of her father still too raw. Come, Sandra patted the piano bench beside her. Sit with me. Music helps when words are too difficult. Charles watched in amazement as Barbara carefully approached the piano. The girl who had been so frightened in the woods now seemed drawn to Sandra's gentle presence. As she settled onto the bench, Sandra began playing again, this time a simple melody that Barbara seemed to recognize. "I know this one," Barbara whispered. "We sang it in choir." Sandra smiled, her hands never stopping. "Then sing for me, dear." Barbara's voice, when it came, was clear and pure despite her recent trauma. She sang softly at first, then with growing confidence as Sandra accompanied her perfectly. Charles stood transfixed. His mother, who often couldn't remember what day it was instinctively adjusting her playing to support Barbara's voice. As one song ended, Sandra seamlessly transitioned into another, this time one of her own compositions. "This one needs words," she said, her fingers dancing across the keys. "I never found the right ones." Barbara listened intently to the melody for a moment, then began to hum along. Gradually she started adding simple lyrics about flowers and sunshine, her young voice bringing new life to Sandra's music. Sandra's face lit up with a clarity Charles hadn't seen in months. "Yes, that's it exactly," she exclaimed. "Charles, isn't she wonderful? Such a natural gift for melody." Charles felt his throat tighten as he watched them together. His mother, who sometimes didn't recognize him, was forming an instant connection with this lost girl through the universal language of music. Over the next hour, Sandra and Barbara moved from one piece to another. Sandra taught Barbara simple piano exercises, their hands moving side by side on the keys. When Barbara made mistakes, Sandra gently guided her fingers to the correct notes, showing a patience that had become rare in her condition. "My father used to play guitar," Barbara said softly during a pause. "He said music helps us remember what's important." Sandra nodded sagely. "Your father was a wise man. Music holds memories that even time cannot erase." She turned to Charles as if suddenly remembering he was there. "We must have a proper piano for Barbara to practice. The one in the East Wing needs tuning." "Of course," Mom Charles agreed, marveling at her unusual clarity. "We'll take care of it tomorrow." As darkness fell outside, Mary appeared with a gentle reminder about Sandra's evening medication. Barbara reluctantly slid off the piano bench, but Sandra caught her hand. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "Music should never be lonely." That night, as Charles walked past the music room on his way to bed, he heard Barbara's voice drifting through the door. She was singing softly to Sandra, who had become agitated after taking her medication. The simple lullaby seemed to calm his mother in a way no medicine ever had. Standing in the darkened hallway, Charles felt something shift in his heart. This child, who had lost so much, was bringing light back into their shadowed home. Through her, Sandra was finding moments of clarity, and the mansion's silent rooms were filling with music once again. The first warning came exactly 1 week after Barbara's arrival. Charles found it in his morning correspondence, a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about Michael Mitchell's tragic car accident. Along with a handwritten note some secrets should stay buried. The paper had been torn precisely, removing any dates or publication information. Mary noticed his troubled expression as she served his morning coffee. "Is everything all right, Mr. Harris?" Her tone was professional, but her eyes held unusual concern. "Just some unsettling correspondence," Charles replied, quickly tucking the note into his suit pocket. As he did so, he noticed Mary's hands trembling slightly as she poured the coffee, something he'd never seen in all her years of service. That evening, Charles spotted an unfamiliar black sedan parked across from the mansion's gates. When he mentioned it to his head of security, the man reported that the same vehicle had been observed 3 times that week, always during Barbara's piano lessons with Sandra. The threats escalated gradually. Anonymous phone calls to his office, silence on the other end before disconnecting. Business associates suddenly cancelling long-standing meetings. Board members making oblique comments about the risks of taking in strays. Victor Blackwood, the senior board member who had been his father's closest friend, cornered Charles after a meeting, "I understand you've taken in a house guest," he said, his cultured voice carrying an unmistakable edge. "One should be careful about inviting complications into one's home." "She's just a child who needed help," Charles responded firmly, though his heart raced at the implied threat. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "No such thing as just anything in our world, Charles. Everything has consequences. Your father understood that." The most disturbing incident came during one of Barbara's piano sessions. Sandra had been having a particularly lucid day, teaching Barbara a complex piece she'd composed years ago. Charles was working in his study when Mary burst in, her usual composure shattered. "Someone's been in Barbara's room," she reported in a harsh whisper. "They went through her things. They were looking for something." Charles followed Mary to Barbara's bedroom. Nothing was obviously disturbed, but he recognized the subtle signs of an expert search. The intruder had been professional, careful, and had access to the house security system. That night, after Barbara and Sandra were asleep, Charles found Mary in the kitchen, methodically cleaning already spotless counters. "Mary," he said quietly, "how much danger are we in?" The housekeeper stopped her cleaning, shoulders tense. "More than you know," she answered after a long pause. "But less than we could be, if proper precautions are taken." The next morning, Charles discovered his private investigator's preliminary report on his desk, though he hadn't requested delivery to the house. One line stood out: "Mitchell's accident matches 3 other fatal crashes in the past year. All victims were investigating irregularities in international adoptions." The pattern was becoming clear. Barbara's father had stumbled onto something big enough to get him killed. Now those same forces were watching the Harris mansion, assessing the threat level, deciding how to handle this complication. Charles began taking precautions. He upgraded the mansion's security system, though he noticed Mary seemed to already know the technical specifications he wanted. He changed his routes to and from work, varied his schedule, installed panic buttons in every room. But the most chilling warning came from Sandra during one of her increasingly rare moments of clarity. She gripped Charles's hand as he said goodnight, her eyes suddenly sharp and focused. "They're still watching," she whispered urgently, "just like before. You have to protect her, Charles. Don't let them take another child." Before he could question her meaning, the fog descended again, leaving her confused and agitated, but her words haunted him. Like before, what did she mean? What did his mother know about all this? The thread that unraveled everything was buried in a routine audit report. Charles had been reviewing international subsidiary documents late one night when a pattern caught his attention. The company's adoption agency partnerships showed irregular financial transfers, small amounts, carefully distributed, but forming a suspicious pattern when viewed together. Diving deeper into the records, Charles discovered a network of shell companies, all connected to Harris Enterprises through layers of complex paperwork. Each shell company worked with different international adoption agencies, all handling children from impoverished regions. The documentation was flawless on the surface, but beneath lay disturbing irregularities. In his father's old office files, Charles found a folder labeled Special Projects International Relations. Inside were photographs of expensive meetings with foreign officials, detailed notes about orphanages in developing countries, and correspondence that made his blood run cold. One memo discussed the acquisition costs of children with desirable characteristics. Sarah Jenkins, his longtime assistant, brought him more troubling information. "Mr. Harris," she said, closing his office door carefully behind her, "I've been cross-referencing those adoption records you asked about. In the past 5 years, 43 children have vanished from our partner agency's records. They entered the system but never reached their designated families. The paperwork was perfect. But the children, they just disappeared." Charles spent sleepless nights connecting the dots, the shell companies, the missing children, Barbara's father's investigation, his own father's carefully maintained records. It pointed to something monstrous, a trafficking operation using legitimate business operations as cover, with Harris Enterprises at its center. The evidence mounted. Financial records showed payments to consultants who specialized in forged documentation. Travel records revealed patterns of children being moved across borders under the guise of medical treatments. Email correspondence, carefully coded, discussed merchandise and special deliveries. Victor Blackwood's name appeared frequently in these transactions, always carefully distanced through layers of intermediaries. The same black sedan that watched the mansion was registered to one of his shell companies. Charles realized with growing horror that his father's closest friend was deeply involved in this operation. The most damning evidence came from Barbara herself, though she didn't realize its significance. During one of her piano lessons, she mentioned offhandedly that her father had been investigating a company called Mitchell International Adoptions before his death. Charles recognized the name. It was one of Harris Enterprises' oldest partnership agencies. But late one night, as Charles pieced together this dark puzzle in his study, Mary entered with her usual evening tea. Her hand shook slightly as she set down the tray. "You found it, haven't you?" she asked quietly. "What they've been hiding all these years." Before Charles could respond, she placed a thin file on his desk. "Your father, Jonathan Harris, he kept records of everything. Not to expose it, but to protect himself. Insurance, he called it." The file contained photos of high-level meetings, bank statements, and a list of names children who had passed through the trafficking network. At the bottom of the list was a note in his father's handwriting: "Mitchell knows too much. Handle it." Charles felt physically ill. His company, his family's legacy, was built on the exploitation of vulnerable children. The wealth he had inherited, the power he wielded, all of it tainted by this horrific truth. But understanding finally dawned about Barbara's presence in his life. She wasn't just a lost child in the woods. She was living proof of this evil, her father murdered for trying to expose what Charles had just discovered. By taking her in, he had unknowingly challenged the very system his father had helped build. The next morning, Charles received a call from his private investigator. "Mr. Harris, about that adoption agency, you asked me to look into Mitchell International. Its founder was Robert Mitchell. According to records, he disappeared 30 years ago, right after his wife gave birth to their son." Charles felt the room spin. Robert Mitchell, the same surname as Barbara. The timing of his disappearance, the connection to the adoption agency, his mother's confused warnings. Everything was connected, but the full truth still eluded him. The discovery came during a quiet Sunday afternoon as Charles helped Barbara search Sandra's music room for new pieces to practice. They were going through old leather-bound portfolios when Barbara pulled a dusty book from the bottom shelf, its pages yellowed with age. "Look at this one, Charles," she said excitedly. "It's handwritten music, and there are notes in the margins." The book was filled with Sandra's elegant musical notation, each page containing not just compositions but personal thoughts and memories. As they flipped through the pages together, a sealed envelope slipped out, yellowed with age but never opened. It was addressed simply for Charles. When the time comes, he recognized his mother's handwriting from decades ago, long before Alzheimer's had begun to steal her away. With trembling fingers, Charles opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, dated just days after his birth. "My dearest son, if you're reading this, then you found my music book, and with it, the truth I've kept hidden for so long. Jonathan Harris is not your biological father. Your true father was Robert Mitchell, a man I loved deeply and lost tragically. The circumstances of his disappearance are tied to dangers I pray you'll never have to face." The lullaby on page 42 was the last piece we wrote together the night before he vanished. The melody holds clues he said you would understand when the time was right. I've kept this secret to protect you, but I fear that silence may have only delayed inevitable confrontation with the truth. Forgive me, my darling boy. All my love. Mother. Papillon. Charles turned to page 42 with shaking hands. The lullaby was there, but something was different about this score. Numbers were hidden within the musical notation, and certain notes were marked with subtle symbols he'd never seen in his mother's other works. Barbara, who had been watching quietly, pointed to the music. "These markings aren't regular notation," she said. "My dad used similar symbols in his investigation notes. They're a kind of code." Charles stared at the girl, a new understanding dawning. Her father's investigation, her surname Mitchell, the trafficking ring, everything was connected. He wasn't just harboring a witness, he had unknowingly taken in his own relative. Racing to his study, Charles pulled out the company records he'd been investigating. The founding date of Mitchell International Adoptions matched the period just before his birth. Robert Mitchell hadn't just disappeared, he'd gone into hiding after discovering something so terrible it had torn their family apart. Charles returned to the music room, where Sandra was now sitting at the piano, Barbara beside her. "Mom," he said gently, kneeling before her, "can you tell me about Robert Mitchell?" Sandra's fingers paused over the keys. For a moment the fog seemed to lift from her eyes. "Robert," she whispered. He tried to stop them. "The children. So many children," her voice broke. "He said the music would keep our secrets safe until you were ready." "Ready for what, Mom?" "To finish what he started." To make it right, her clarity faded as quickly as it had come, leaving her confused and agitated. That evening, Charles sat in his study, surrounded by his father's papers, his mother's music book, and the growing evidence of a decades-old conspiracy. The man he'd believed was his father had been part of a trafficking ring. His real father had tried to expose it and had paid with his life, or at least his freedom. Mary appeared in the doorway, her face grave. "I see you found it," she said quietly. "I've been waiting for this day for 30 years. "You knew?" Charles asked, his voice hoarse. "I've always known. It was my job to protect you, to watch for signs that they had discovered your true identity." She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "But I'm not just your housekeeper, Charles. There's so much more you need to know." Mary sat down across from Charles, her perfect posture maintained through decades of playing the role of housekeeper finally faltering. "I am your aunt," she said softly, "Sandra's younger sister, and I loved your father Robert before he fell in love with Sandra." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles stared at the woman who had served his family faithfully for 30 years, seeing her in an entirely new light. The resemblance to his mother, subtle but unmistakable, had been there all along. "I met Robert first," Mary continued, her voice thick with long-suppressed emotion. "We were both young, passionate about changing the world. He was investigating corruption in international adoptions even then. I helped him gather evidence, shared his dreams of exposing the truth." She paused, a sad smile crossing her face. "But then he met Sandra, and everything changed." Mary stood, walking to the window where moonlight cast shadows across the grounds. "I didn't handle it well at first. How could I? I watched my sister fall in love with the man I thought was meant for me. But Sandra, she had a way of making everything beautiful. Her music, her love, it transformed Robert. They were perfect together. When Sandra became pregnant with you, Robert was close to exposing the entire trafficking operation. He had evidence against powerful people, including Jonathan Harris." Mary turned back to Charles, her eyes glistening. "But they discovered what he was doing. The night you were born, Robert came to me. He needed someone he could trust, someone who could help protect his family." Charles found his voice. "So you arranged the adoption? Made everyone believe Jonathan Harris was my father?" Mary nodded. "It was the only way to keep you safe. Jonathan agreed to the plan not out of kindness, but because it gave him leverage over the people he was working with. Sandra would marry him, you would become his heir, and the secrets would stay buried." "But why become our housekeeper?" Charles asked, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of her sacrifice. "Why spend 30 years serving the family you were born into?" "Because I promised Robert I would watch over you both. The housekeeper role was perfect, invisible but present, able to monitor everything without drawing attention. I maintained contacts with Robert's old network, intercepted threats, kept track of the people who might expose the truth. Mary approached Charles's desk, pulling a small key from around her neck. This opens a safe deposit box at First National. It contains everything Robert compiled before he disappeared: names, dates, bank accounts. He said I would know when it was time to share it with you. She placed the key in Charles's palm. With Barbara here, with what you've discovered, that time is now. Did you ever hear from him again? Charles asked, closing his fingers around the key. Mary's composure cracked slightly. Once. 10 years ago. A message letting me know he was still fighting, still trying to bring down the trafficking network from the inside. He said, her voice broke. He said he was proud of the man you were becoming, even from a distance. The weight of these revelations pressed down on Charles. His aunt had sacrificed her own life, her own identity, to protect him. She had watched him grow up, unable to show the love she felt, maintaining her cover even as it broke her heart. All these years, he said, you've been right here, caring for us, protecting us. Why reveal everything now? Because Barbara's arrival has changed everything. The same people who forced Robert into hiding, who threatened your mother, who silenced Michael Mitchell, they're watching us again. But this time we have a chance to finish what Robert started, to finally expose the truth. Mary straightened her shoulders, and for the first time Charles saw the strength that had allowed her to maintain this deception for so long. I'm tired of hiding, Charles. Tired of watching you struggle with questions I could have answered. Tired of seeing Sandra lose herself while carrying these secrets. It's time for the truth to come out, whatever the cost. The emergency board meeting was called at dawn, the morning after Charles received Robert's evidence from the safe deposit box. The boardroom, usually a place of calculated decisions and careful politeness, crackled with tension as Charles laid out the evidence of decades of corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart, what I am about to share will shake this company to its foundations. He distributed folders containing carefully selected documents, watching as board members' expressions shifted from curiosity to shock, and in some cases, carefully concealed fear. Victor Blackwood's face remained impassive as he flipped through the pages, but his knuckles whitened around his leather portfolio. These are serious allegations, Charles, he said smoothly. One might question the wisdom of dredging up ancient history, especially given the potential impact on our shareholders. Sarah Chen, the youngest board member, spoke up. Ancient history? These transactions are current. Look at the dates on these transfers. We're not just talking about past sins, this is happening now, under our watch. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Board members chose sides quickly, those who wanted full disclosure and immediate action versus those arguing for discretion and damage control. The division largely fell along generational lines, with older members advocating silence while younger directors pushed for transparency. Think about what you're doing, warned Richard Morton, one of his father's oldest friends. This company employs thousands. Our charitable foundations support countless good causes. Would you risk all that over some misguided sense of justice? Charles stood firm. We built this success on the suffering of innocent children. Every donation, every charitable act has been tainted by this blood money. I'm not asking for your permission to investigate, I'm informing you of the investigation that's already begun. Victoria Reynolds, head of legal compliance, cleared her throat. Mr. Harris is right. We have a legal and ethical obligation to report these findings to the authorities. The question isn't whether to act, but how to proceed while minimizing collateral damage. Blackwood's mask of calm finally cracked. You naive fool, he spat at Charles. You think your father built this company by playing nice? There are forces at work here you can't begin to understand. Forces that have dealt with threats far more significant than you. The threat hung in the air, heavy and explicit. Charles met Blackwood's gaze. Is that what happened to Robert Mitchell? To Michael Mitchell? Were they dealt with when they discovered the truth? The room fell silent. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others stared intently at their papers, avoiding eye contact. "I move for an immediate vote," Sarah Chen announced, breaking the tension. "Those in favor of full disclosure and cooperation with authorities versus those who wish to handle this internally." The vote revealed the deep divide: 7 for disclosure, 6 against, with 2 abstentions. Charles had his mandate, but the narrow margin warned of battles to come. As the meeting adjourned, board members split into tense groups, whispering in corners. Charles observed alliances forming and dissolving in real time. Victoria Reynolds approached him privately, her voice low. "You'll need protection," she said. "Not just physical security. You need documentation, witnesses, multiple copies of everything stored in secure locations. They'll try to discredit you, paint you as unstable or vindictive." Charles nodded, thinking of the precautions Mary had already put in place. "I know, but I won't let them bury this again. Too many lives have been destroyed already." Blackwood was the last to leave, pausing at the door. "You're not the only one with family to protect, Charles." Remember that the words sent a chill down Charles's spine, a reminder that the stakes in this game extended far beyond the boardroom. The first attempt to silence Charles came in the form of a lucrative offer. Victor Blackwood presented it in Charles's office one evening: full control of Harris Enterprises' European operations, a substantial increase in personal wealth, and complete autonomy, all in exchange for his silence and immediate relocation to London. "Think of it as a promotion, not a bribe," Blackwood said smoothly, sliding the contract across Charles's desk. "A fresh start, away from all this." Unpleasantness, his eyes narrowed when Charles didn't reach for the papers. "Barbara could have an excellent education at any of London's finest schools." The mention of Barbara made Charles's blood run cold. "Get out," he said quietly, his voice trembling with barely contained rage, "and don't ever mention her name again." The next day, Charles discovered his corporate passwords had been changed, key files were missing, and several long-term clients suddenly cancelled their contracts. An emergency board meeting was called to discuss his erratic behavior and concerning decision-making. Mary intercepted him before he left for the meeting. "They've been watching the house," she reported, her face drawn with worry. "2 men in a black SUV, they're professionals, government or ex-military training, and they're particularly interested in Barbara's schedule." Charles immediately hired additional security, but threats continued to materialize in unexpected ways. Barbara's piano teacher received an anonymous offer to relocate abroad. The private school Charles had arranged for her reported pressure from major donors to revoke her admission. One evening, as Barbara practiced with Sandra, Charles found a manila envelope on his desk containing photos: Barbara walking to the music room, Sandra in her garden, Mary at the market. The message was clear: every moment, every movement was being monitored. The pressure extended to his allies within the company. Sarah Chen's teenage daughter narrowly escaped an attempted kidnapping. Victoria Reynolds discovered her home had been broken into, though nothing was taken. The message was clear: supporting Charles would have consequences. The situation reached a critical point when Barbara discovered a stuffed animal on her bed identical to one her father had given her, which had been left behind the night of his murder. Attached was a note: children should be seen, not heard. That night, Charles found Barbara crying in the music room, her small frame shaking with fear. "They're going to kill me like they killed Daddy," she sobbed. "I should just go away, keep you all safe." Charles knelt beside her, taking her trembling hands in his. "Listen to me, Barbara. You are not going anywhere. You're family now, and family protects each other, no matter what." But even as he spoke these words, he heard glass breaking somewhere in the mansion. Mary burst into the room, her usual composure shattered. "They're here," she whispered urgently. "Multiple intruders. We need to move now." Charles scooped up Barbara while Mary hurried to Sandra's room. They had rehearsed this evacuation. though Charles had hoped they'd never need it. Through the mansion's old servant passages they moved in darkness, hearing heavy footsteps above. They reached the garage where a car waited, engine running. As Charles secured Barbara in the back seat, a shot rang out, shattering the garage window. Mary pushed Sandra into the car, then suddenly stiffened, her hand going to her shoulder where blood bloomed against her blouse. "Drive," she ordered through gritted teeth, climbing into the passenger seat. "The safe house. Don't stop for anything." As they sped through the night, Charles glimpsed men emerging from the mansion in his rearview mirror. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah Chen: board meeting tomorrow. Vote of no confidence. They're making their move. Barbara's small voice came from the back seat, singing softly to keep Sandra calm in the darkness. The same lullaby that held the code to all their family secrets now served as comfort in their flight. The safe house turned out to be a lakeside cottage owned by Sarah Chen's family, isolated enough for privacy but close enough to the city for strategic purposes. As Mary's wound was being treated by a discreet doctor, Charles began assembling his team of allies. Sarah Chen arrived first, carrying boxes of corporate documents she'd managed to secure before they could be destroyed. "Half the executive floor is being cleaned out as we speak," she reported, spreading papers across the cottage's dining table. "They're shredding everything they can get their hands on." Victoria Reynolds joined them via secure video link, her legal expertise proving invaluable. "I've contacted trusted colleagues at the SEC and Justice Department," she said, her image flickering on the laptop screen. "They're ready to move, but we need ironclad evidence. These people have friends in high places." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. David Parker, the company's longtime head of it, arrived past midnight with several hard drives. "I've been quietly backing up everything for years," he explained, his usually nervous demeanor replaced by quiet determination. "Ever since I found those irregularities in the adoption agency databases, I knew someday someone would need this." Jack Reeves, the private investigator who'd helped Charles initially, brought additional muscle to their operation. His network of former law enforcement contacts provided surveillance and security, keeping watch over the cottage and monitoring their opponents' movements. They worked through the night, piecing together decades of criminal activity. Sarah's financial expertise revealed complex money laundering schemes. Victoria's legal knowledge identified clear violations of international law. But David's technical skills uncovered digital trails that couldn't be erased. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a series of transactions. Every time a child disappeared from the system, a corresponding payment was made to one of these shell companies. The amounts varied based on the child's characteristics. She couldn't keep the disgust from her voice. Mary, her arm in a sling, worked alongside them, filling in historical gaps. "These names," she said, indicating a list of board members from the early days. They were all part of Jonathan Harris's inner circle. Most have passed away, but their children now sit on boards across the country. The network is generational. Barbara, unable to sleep, sat quietly in a corner, drawing in a sketchbook. Occasionally she'd look up and offer a detail about something she'd overheard her father mention, each piece adding to their growing picture of corruption. Charles coordinated everything, running on coffee and determination. He'd already lost his company. The board's vote of no confidence had been unanimous in his absence, but that had freed him to focus entirely on exposing the truth. "We're not just fighting a company," he told his assembled allies. "We're fighting a system that's been in place for decades. They've had years to bury evidence, silence witnesses, build protective layers of deniability." Victoria's voice came through the laptop speakers. "Which is why we need to be strategic. We can't just dump everything to the media. They'll discredit it, discredit you, and bury it all in legal challenges that could take years to resolve. What we need," Sarah added, "is a way to make the evidence so public, so undeniable, that they can't make it disappear." "I might have an idea about that," David said quietly. Everyone turned to look at the usually reticent director. The company's annual charity gala is next week. Every major player will be there, including most of the board. It's also being live-streamed to donors worldwide. A plan began to take shape. While their opponents believed them to be hiding and desperate, they would prepare their counterattack. Each ally brought unique skills to the operation: Sarah's financial acumen, Victoria's legal strategy, David's technical expertise, Jack's tactical experience, and Mary's deep knowledge of the players involved. As dawn broke over the lake, Charles watched his unlikely team at work. These people were risking everything: careers, reputations, possibly their lives, to help him expose the truth. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, but he also felt something else: hope. Barbara appeared at his side, offering him a drawing she'd made. It showed all of them working together, with the word family written across the top. Charles felt tears prick his eyes as he realized that in losing his company, he'd gained something far more valuable: a true family united by purpose and principle rather than blood or business. The old upright piano in the safe house became Sandra's anchor in their temporary refuge. Though not as grand as her instrument at the mansion, its worn keys seemed to help her connect with memories that usually stayed locked away. It was during one of her practice sessions with Barbara that the first significant revelation came. The young girl was playing the lullaby from Sandra's music book, the one containing hidden codes, when Sandra suddenly straightened, her eyes clearing with unexpected lucidity. "That's not how Robert wrote it," she said sharply. "The rhythm in the second measure, it's meant to be different." Charles, who had been reviewing documents nearby, quickly moved to the piano. "Mom? What do you mean about how Robert wrote it?" "The code," Sandra said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Robert used musical notation to hide account numbers. The rhythm patterns are coordinates her fingers move to the keys, playing a variation of the melody. Like this. Each change in tempo represents a different location." Barbara watched intently as Sandra's hands moved across the keys. "It's like what Daddy used to do," she said quietly. "He would hide information in plain sight, make it look like something ordinary." Sandra turned to Charles, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "The night Robert disappeared, he told me everything. About the children, about Jonathan's involvement, about the evidence he'd gathered. He said the music would keep it safe until you were ready to understand." "Why me?" Charles asked, his throat tight with emotion. "Because you were his son. Because he knew they'd never suspect a child to be the key to their downfall." Her eyes filled with tears. "He loved you so much, Charles. Leaving us nearly destroyed him, but he thought it was the only way to protect us." Mary appeared in the doorway, drawn by the conversation. Sandra looked at her sister, recognition flooding her face. "Mary, you've been watching over us all this time, haven't you? Just like you promised Robert?" The sisters shared a look of understanding that spanned decades of secrets and sacrifice. Then Sandra turned back to the piano, her fingers moving with purpose. "There's more hidden in the music, not just account numbers. Names, dates, locations, everything Robert discovered. He spent months encoding it all into these compositions." For the next hour, Sandra walked them through the hidden meanings in her music book. Each piece contained different pieces of the puzzle: offshore account numbers hidden in time signatures, names encoded in key changes, locations buried in rhythm patterns. Her mind, so often lost in fog, was razor sharp when focused on the music. "Jonathan knew something was hidden in these pieces," she explained. "That's why he insisted I keep playing them at charity events. He thought he could crack the code if he heard them enough times. But he never understood that the music itself wasn't the key, it was the relationship between the pieces, how they connected to each other." Barbara, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke up. "Like a map. Each song is like a piece of a map, and when you put them together." "Exactly," Sandra smiled at the girl. "Robert said a child would see it more clearly than any adult. The innocence of a child's perspective was the perfect protection for his evidence." The clarity began to fade from Sandra's eyes, but she fought to hold on to it for a few moments more. "Charles," she said urgently, "there's something else you need to know. About the night Robert left, He wasn't alone. Someone helped him disappear. Someone who's been working from the inside all these years to gather more evidence. Who, Mum? Who helped him? But the fog was returning. Sandra's hands fell still on the piano keys, her expression becoming confused. Is it time for my medicine? She asked vaguely. Charles felt the familiar pain of watching his mother slip away, but this time it was tempered by gratitude for what she'd managed to share. Her revelations had given them not just evidence, but a way to prove its authenticity. The musical encoding was a signature that couldn't be forged or denied. Barbara reached out and took Sandra's hand. "Would you like to hear me play your lullaby again?" she asked gently. As she began to play, Sandra smiled, humming along. Though the moment of clarity had passed, the music still connected them, bridging the gap between past and present, between what was lost and what remained. Late that night, as the others slept, Mary sat at the cottage's kitchen table, methodically cleaning her wound. Charles found her there, her normally perfect posture slumped with exhaustion and pain. "You should be resting," he said softly, taking a seat across from her. Mary managed a weak smile. 30 years of habit aren't easily broken. "I've spent too long watching over this family to stop now," she winced as she adjusted the bandage. "Besides, I need to tell you the full story. You deserve to know everything I've sacrificed to keep you all safe." From a hidden compartment in her suitcase, Mary retrieved a worn leather journal. "I've documented everything since the beginning," she explained. Every threat, every close call, every piece of information that might someday prove useful. The journal revealed a lifetime of vigilance. Mary had orchestrated elaborate security systems disguised as household renovations. She'd cultivated a network of informants among service staff at other wealthy homes. She'd monitored every person who came into contact with the family, background checking everyone from gardeners to Sandra's doctors. The night Robert left, Mary said, her voice thick with emotion, "I had to make a choice. I could go with him, help him gather evidence from the outside, or stay behind and protect you and Sandra. He begged me to come with him." She paused, fighting back tears. "We had planned to be together, you see, before he fell in love with Sandra." Charles sat in stunned silence as Mary continued. "But I knew I could do more good here. Someone had to stay, had to watch for signs that they'd discovered your true identity. So I created this persona, the perfect, invisible housekeeper. I learned to fade into the background, to see without being seen." She showed him surveillance photos spanning decades, Victor Blackwood meeting with suspicious figures, board members exchanging packages in parking garages, Jonathan Harris's secret meetings with people who later disappeared. "Your father, Jonathan, knew who I was, of course. It was part of our arrangement. He thought having me there, under his control, gave him leverage over Robert. What he never realized was that every threat he made, every piece of information he carelessly revealed in my presence, went straight into this journal." Mary's hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages. "I gave up everything, my identity, my chance at love, my own life to stay close to you and Sandra. Every time you called me MS, Wilson instead of Aunt Mary, every family dinner I served instead of shared, every holiday I spent in the servants' quarters. It broke my heart a little more." She showed him entries from his childhood, detailed notes about suspicious incidents, potential threats, close calls he'd never known about. There were so many times they almost found out. "When you were 10, a teacher noticed how much you looked like Robert. I had to arrange for her transfer to another school. When you were 16, a reporter started asking questions about your birth certificate. I made sure those questions stopped." The depth of Mary's dedication stunned Charles. She had shaped his entire life from the shadows, protecting him from threats he never knew existed. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked softly. "Because knowing would have put you in danger. Your reactions had to be genuine. Your ignorance was your best protection." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "But now, with Barbara here, with everything coming to light, the old protections won't work anymore. We need new strategies. Mary pulled out one final document, a detailed contingency plan she'd developed years ago. If anything happens to me, she said firmly, everything I know, every piece of evidence I've gathered will be automatically released to specific people. I've arranged it so they can't stop the information even if they eliminate all of us. The clinical way she discussed their possible deaths sent a chill down Charles's spine. You've thought of everything, haven't you? It's been my life's work, she said simply. Protecting this family is all I have left. The first concrete proof of Robert Mitchell's continued existence arrived in an unexpected way. David Parker, while analyzing the company's digital records, discovered a pattern of system access that didn't match any known employee. Someone had been quietly monitoring Harris Enterprises' secure servers for years, leaving behind nearly invisible traces that only a master programmer would notice. Look at this code signature, David explained, pointing to his laptop screen. It's brilliant. The program mimics normal system processes, but it's actually creating a shadow record of every transaction, every document, every email. And the interesting part, it's been running since before we switched to digital records. Someone implemented this during the original system setup. But Charles remembered something from Sandra's musical codes. The rhythm pattern in the third movement, he said suddenly. Mom said it wasn't just coordinates, it was a sequence. Could it be? David's fingers flew across the keyboard. When he input the sequence from Sandra's music as a code key, encrypted files began unlocking. Years of carefully gathered evidence flooded their screens, photographs, documents, audio recordings, all meticulously organized and annotated. This is incredible, Sarah Chen breathed, scanning through the files. Not just Harris Enterprises, he's documented trafficking operations across multiple companies, multiple countries. Financial records, transport routes, lists of compromised officials. A video file caught Charles's attention. The timestamp showed it was recorded just 6 months ago. When he played it, his heart nearly stopped. There, in grainy surveillance footage, was a man he recognized from old photographs, older, grayer, but unmistakably Robert Mitchell. He was tracking a group of men loading children into a private plane, carefully documenting everything with a hidden camera. Mary, seeing the footage, gripped Charles's arm. He's been doing exactly what he promised, fighting them from the inside, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. More revelations followed. They found records of mysterious accidents that had befallen key trafficking operators, suspicious equipment failures that had stranded transport vehicles, anonymous tips to authorities that had saved dozens of children. Behind each incident, they could now trace Robert's invisible hand. A document dated just weeks before Barbara found her way to the mansion caught everyone's attention. It detailed Robert's connection to Michael Mitchell, Barbara's father. Robert had been secretly guiding Michael's investigation, providing leads while maintaining his cover. But something had gone wrong. Someone had discovered the connection. That's why Daddy had to run, Barbara said quietly. She had been listening from the doorway, unnoticed. He said someone called to warn him, someone who knew things no one else could know. That was my grandfather, wasn't it? Charles nodded, his throat tight. He tried to save your father, Barbara. And when he couldn't, he made sure you found your way to us. Victoria Reynolds, still connected via video, spoke up. This changes everything. With these records, we can prove not just individual crimes, but an organized long-term criminal enterprise. And more importantly, we can prove that Robert Mitchell has been working as an undercover operative this entire time. But why hasn't he come forward before now? Sarah asked. With all this evidence? Mary answered, her voice soft with understanding. Because he was waiting for Charles. Everything he's done, the musical codes, the hidden programs, the careful documentation, it was all designed to be discovered by his son. He needed someone on the inside of Harris Enterprises, someone with the position and power to expose everything. But also someone they would never suspect. A new message appeared on David's screen, fresh code accessing their secure system. As they watched, words formed. Charles, the pieces are in place. The evidence is secure. Now it's time to finish this. But remember, they will sacrifice everything to keep their secrets. Trust no one outside your current circle. I'll contact you when it's safe. RM. The message erased itself immediately, but its impact lingered. Robert Mitchell wasn't just alive, he was active, prepared, and ready to help them bring down the trafficking network once and for all. The annual Harris Enterprises charity gala transformed the company's lobby into a glittering spectacle of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows over gathered dignitaries, board members, and society's elite. Victor Blackwood held court near the grand staircase, champagne in hand, projecting confidence even as his eyes constantly scanned the crowd. Sarah Chen's plan was already in motion. As head of the charity committee, she had arranged for the event to be live-streamed globally, ostensibly to attract international donors. David Parker had ensured their evidence would override the building's digital systems at precisely the right moment. Charles adjusted his bow tie, feeling the weight of the hidden microphone. From her position at the security desk, Mary watched the monitors, coordinating with their allies through a discreet earpiece. Victoria Reynolds waited with a team of federal agents in vehicles surrounding the building, ready to move on her signal. Mr. Harris Blackwood called out, spotting Charles. "How bold of you to attend, given recent unpleasantness." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I trust you've reconsidered our generous offer." "Actually," Charles replied, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet lobby, "I'm here to make an offer of my own." He nodded to David, who activated the override sequence. The massive screens around the lobby flickered to life, displaying documentation of decades of trafficking operations. Financial records, photographs, transit routes, everything Robert Mitchell had gathered over 30 years began playing in a devastating slideshow. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles announced, as gasps and murmurs filled the room. "For years, Harris Enterprises has presented itself as a pillar of corporate responsibility. Tonight, you'll learn the truth about what really built this company's fortune." Blackwood's facade cracked. Security barked, but Mary had already locked down the building systems. The private security team he'd hired found themselves trapped outside, while police units moved into position. "It's over," Victor Charles continued. "Every piece of evidence is being simultaneously released to law enforcement agencies worldwide. There's no containing this, no covering it up." "You fool," Blackwood snarled, his cultured veneer dissolving completely. "Do you think this is just about money? We created order from chaos. We gave unwanted children to families who could provide for them. We built an empire of influence that shaped nations." "You built an empire on stolen lives," Charles countered. "On torn-apart families and children treated like commodities. Well, tonight that empire falls." Several board members tried to flee toward the emergency exits, only to find federal agents waiting. Victoria Reynolds strode in, flanked by her team. "Victor Blackwood," she announced, "you and your associates are under arrest for human trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy." But Blackwood had one last card to play. "If I'm going down," he said, pulling a phone from his pocket, "I'm not going alone. One call, and your precious Barbara won't live to see morning." The threat hung in the air for a moment before a familiar voice responded from the crowd. "I don't think so." Robert Mitchell emerged from among the gathered guests, older but unmistakable to anyone who knew his face. "Your men at the safe house have already been arrested. Barbara is safe." Charles stared at his biological father, seeing his own features echoed in the older man's face. 30 years of hiding, gathering evidence, waiting for this moment. It was all there in Robert's eyes as he faced down the man who had forced him away from his family. "It's fitting," Robert continued, addressing the stunned crowd, "that it ends here, where it began. 30 years ago, I discovered what these men were doing. I couldn't stop them then, but I could gather evidence, work from the shadows, and wait for the right moment. That moment has come. Federal agents moved through the crowd, reading rights, securing suspects. The live stream captured everything, ensuring no detail could be suppressed or denied. Decades of carefully maintained secrecy crumbled in minutes. As Blackwood was led away in handcuffs, still sputtering threats, Charles felt a profound shift in the air. The mansion-like lobby, once a symbol of power and prestige, now felt more like a prison being opened, its dark secrets finally exposed to light. The triumph at the gala was short-lived. Just as the federal agents were securing the last of the conspirators, Charles's phone buzzed with a frantic call from the safe house. Despite Robert's assurance, something had gone terribly wrong. They took her. Mary's voice was tight with panic and pain. A second team we didn't know about. They knocked out our security, used some kind of gas. I tried to stop them, but her voice broke. They have Barbara, Charles. And Sandra saw everything. She's completely distraught. Charles felt the blood drain from his face. Across the lobby, he saw Robert receive similar news through his earpiece, the older man's expression hardening into something dangerous. Before either could move, a text message arrived on Charles's phone, a video showing Barbara bound and terrified in what appeared to be an industrial storage room. Blackwood, still in handcuffs, smiled coldly. "Insurance policy," he said. "Did you really think I wouldn't have a contingency plan? One call from me, and she lives." Otherwise, he let the threat hang in the air. Victoria Reynolds immediately organized search teams, but the kidnappers had chosen their location well. The video showed no identifying details, and the warehouse district contained hundreds of similar locations. "Wait," Robert said suddenly, studying the video. Barbara's singing, indeed, barely audible over the video's poor audio. Barbara was softly singing the lullaby from Sandra's music book, the one containing hidden codes. It's not random, Charles realized. Look at her hand, she's tapping out a rhythm against the floor. The same pattern from the third movement, the one that contained coordinates. Years of running his company had taught Charles to maintain composure in crisis, but his voice shook slightly. "She's telling us where she is." David Parker quickly analyzed the video, isolating the audio. The pattern repeats every 12 seconds, if we interpret it the same way as the musical code. Warehouse 47, North Harbor. Robert finished. "It's one of their old transit points. I documented it years ago." He turned to Charles. "They'll be expecting us. It's a trap." "I know," Charles replied, already moving toward the exit. "But we're going anyway." The drive to the warehouse district was tense. Police units followed at a distance, ready to move in, but knowing any obvious presence could endanger Barbara. Charles, Robert, and a small team of trusted security personnel approached the location silently. Inside the warehouse, they could hear Barbara's voice echoing, still singing, still sending them signals through the melody. But they also heard something else, Sandra's voice, joining in harmony with her granddaughter's song. "That's impossible," Charles whispered. "Sandra's at the safe house." No, came Mary's voice through their earpieces, pain evident in her tone. "After they took Barbara, we couldn't stop her. She said she knew where they'd take her, something about the music leading her home. She slipped away in the confusion." The realization hit Charles like a physical blow. His mother, in one of her moments of clarity, had followed the same musical clues they had, but in her condition, walking into this situation. They found them in a central storage area, Barbara tied to a chair, Sandra sitting calmly beside her, both singing the lullaby while armed men watched in confusion. One of the kidnappers was frantically calling someone, clearly unsure how to handle this unexpected development. "The thing about music," Sandra said clearly, her voice carrying in the large space, "is that it contains truth that can't be hidden. Every note, every rhythm tells a story." She looked directly at their hidden position, somehow knowing they were there. "Isn't that right, Robert?" In the chaos that followed, several things happened at once. The federal agents burst in from multiple entrances. The kidnappers, startled by Sandra's apparent recognition of their presence, turned toward the shadows where Charles and Robert waited. And Barbara, seizing the moment of distraction, kicked over her chair and rolled behind a stack of crates. In the chaos of the warehouse raid, Sandra Harris stood with a clarity and purpose that defied her illness. As federal agents exchanged fire with the kidnappers, she moved with surprising agility toward Barbara's position, humming the lullaby that had brought her here, the same music that had protected their family's secrets for decades. "Stay close to me, dear," she said to Barbara, her voice carrying a strength that Charles hadn't heard in years. "The music will guide us out, just like it guided me here." There was no confusion in her eyes now, no trace of the fog that usually clouded her mind. Sandra positioned herself between Barbara and the armed men, her presence commanding attention even in the midst of the firefight. "I've watched children disappear for 30 years, she announced, her voice ringing through the warehouse. "I've carried that guilt, pretended not to know, hidden behind my illness. No more." The lead kidnapper, a man Charles recognized as one of Blackwood's most trusted security officers, leveled his weapon at them. "Stay where you are, Mrs. Harris." Mr. Blackwood was clear about what happens if anyone interferes. Mr. Blackwood, Sandra said with surprising disdain, never understood the power of a mother's love. Or a grandmother's. She began to sing again, louder this time, the melody of her lullaby filling the space. Barbara, understanding instinctively, joined in, their voices creating a haunting harmony that seemed to freeze everyone in place. As they sang, Sandra slowly moved them toward a side exit she'd noticed earlier, one that wasn't on any of the building's official plans, but that she remembered from 30 years ago, when she'd first discovered what her husband was involved in. "The night Robert left," she said, never taking her eyes off the armed men, "I memorized every detail of these places, every exit, every hiding spot. I knew someday the knowledge would be needed. Even when I began to forget everything else, I held on to this." The kidnappers, momentarily mesmerized by the incongruous sight of the elderly woman and young girl singing in the middle of a raid, didn't notice federal agents flanking their position. Sandra had created the perfect distraction. "Now, Barbara," Sandra commanded suddenly, pushing the girl toward the hidden exit just as the agents rushed the gunmen. In the ensuing confusion, she placed herself directly in the line of fire, shielding her granddaughter with her own body. Charles and Robert, who had been working their way around the periphery, reached them at that moment. Charles pulled his mother to safety, while Robert secured Barbara, the family finally united in the middle of the chaos they'd been trying to prevent for 30 years. "Mom," Charles said urgently, checking her for injuries, "that was incredibly dangerous. How did you even know where to find her?" Sandra smiled, touching his cheek gently. "A mother always knows where to find her children. And music remembers everything. Even when we forget for a moment." Her eyes clouded with confusion, but she fought it back. "Besides, I've been playing a role for so long," the confused old woman, too lost in her own mind to be a threat. "It gave me freedom to watch, to remember, to plan." As the federal agents secured the last of the kidnappers, Sandra turned to Barbara, who was clinging to Robert's hand while staring at her grandmother with awe. "Your father understood about the music too, didn't he, dear? That's why you kept singing, sending us the signal we needed." Barbara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy always said music speaks when words can't. When they took me, I remembered what you taught me about the lullaby's secret code. I knew if I kept singing it, we would find you," Robert finished, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like the music helped me protect our family all these years." Sandra's moment of clarity was fading. They could all see it in her eyes, but she had held on long enough to save her granddaughter, to help bring their family's long nightmare to an end. In the aftermath of Barbara's rescue, the family gathered at the safe house, where Robert Mitchell finally shared the full story of his 30-year mission. They sat in the lakeside cottage's living room, Sandra drifting in and out of awareness but peaceful, Barbara curled up beside her, while Mary watched from her post by the window, ever vigilant. "I never wanted to leave," Robert began, his voice heavy with decades of guilt and longing. "But that night, when I confronted Jonathan Harris with evidence of the trafficking ring, he made it clear either I disappeared, or my family would. He already had contingency plans in place, accidents arranged, evidence planted. Charles studied his biological father's face, seeing his own features reflected back, along with years of hardship etched into every line. So you chose to go underground, to fight from the shadows. I created a network of aliases, moved between countries, gathered evidence. Every time they set up a new operation, I was there, documenting everything. But I couldn't move against them directly. They were watching you and Sandra too closely. One wrong move and... He couldn't finish the sentence. But you weren't working alone, Mary said quietly. Were you, Robert? Robert shook his head. No, over the years I found others' parents whose children had disappeared, law enforcement officials who'd been silenced, even some of their own operatives who'd grown disgusted with what they were doing. We formed a shadow organization, working to disrupt their operations wherever we could. He pulled out a worn photograph, showing a much younger version of himself with Sandra and infant Charles. I kept this with me always. It helped me remember what I was fighting for. Every child I managed to save, every operation I disrupted, I did it thinking of you, Charles. Hoping that someday, when you were ready, we could finish this together. Michael Mitchell, Barbara said suddenly. He was working with you too, wasn't he? That's why he had the same last name. You gave him your alias to help him investigate. Robert's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the girl. Michael was one of our most dedicated operatives. When he discovered their new trafficking routes, I tried to warn him in time. I never knew he had a daughter. Not until you found your way to Charles. It felt like fate, bringing our families together again. The most shocking revelation came when Robert explained the true extent of Jonathan Harris's involvement. He wasn't just complicit, he was one of the architects of the entire operation. The adoption agencies, the offshore accounts, the network of corrupt officials, it was all his design. But he made one crucial mistake. What was that, Charles asked, though part of him already knew the answer. He underestimated the power of family. He thought by separating us, by forcing me into hiding and making me watch my son grow up from a distance, he would break our spirit. Instead, he gave us the perfect cover to work against him. Every business trip he took, every document he signed. Every meeting he attended, I was there, gathering evidence, building the case that would eventually bring it all down. Sandra stirred, one of her lucid moments returning. The music, she said clearly. You left messages in the music. Even when they made me perform at their events, I was actually broadcasting your codes. Yes, Robert smiled sadly. Every piece you played contained hidden information. Dates, names, locations, all disguised as musical notations. The very people we were investigating would sit in those charity concerts, never realizing they were listening to the evidence of their own crimes. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Charles. That's why Blackwood was so desperate to stop us. It wasn't just about the current operations. Exposure meant 30 years of crimes coming to light. Every child they trafficked, every family they destroyed, every life they ruined. All of it documented, Robert confirmed. And now finally we have enough proof to bring the entire network down. Not just Harris Enterprises, but operations across multiple countries. The arrests tonight were just the beginning. The warning came at dawn, just as they were finalizing plans to present their evidence to an international task force. Mary, monitoring their security systems, detected multiple vehicles approaching the safe house from different directions. They're here, she announced grimly. At least 3 teams. Professional mercenaries by the look of their equipment. Blackwood must have had one final contingency plan. Robert's face hardened as he studied the security feeds. They're not here to negotiate. This is a cleanup operation. They'll eliminate everyone and destroy all evidence. Charles immediately began organizing their evacuation. We need to get Barbara and Mom to the secondary location. Mary, alert our federal contacts. There's no time, Robert interrupted, his voice carrying a finality that made everyone freeze. They've cut off all communications, and they're too close to get everyone out. He turned to Charles, gripping his son's shoulders. but I can buy you the time you need." Understanding dawned in Charles's eyes. "No, we just found each other again. There has to be another way." Robert smiled sadly. "I've spent 30 years preparing for this moment. Everything I've done, the evidence gathering, the coded messages, creating this network of allies, it was all to ensure that when the time came, you would be ready to finish what I started. But for you to do that, you have to survive this morning." Barbara, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up, like my daddy did. He sacrificed himself to save me too. Robert knelt before his granddaughter, touching her cheek gently. "Your father was one of the bravest men I ever knew. He understood, as I do, that sometimes protecting the ones we love means making impossible choices." Sandra, in one of her clear moments, gripped Robert's hand. Just like before, she whispered, "You're leaving to protect us, just like before." "This time is different," Robert assured her. "This time we've already won. The evidence is secure, the network is exposed. All that matters now is getting our family to safety." He turned to Mary. "You know the backup route we discussed?" Mary nodded, tears in her eyes. "The tunnel system under the boathouse. I'll get them through." Robert pulled Charles into a fierce embrace. "I am so proud of the man you've become," he whispered. "Everything I hoped for my son, you've exceeded. Now take our family and go. Complete what we started." Before Charles could protest further, Robert was moving. He grabbed several flash drives and a laptop, stuffing them into a bag. "They'll follow me," he explained, checking his weapon. "They'll think I have the only copies of the evidence. It should give you enough time to get clear." The sound of vehicles approaching grew louder. Robert headed for the front door, then paused for one final look at his family, the son he'd watched from afar for 30 years, the woman he'd never stopped loving, the granddaughter he'd just found, the sister-in-law who'd kept his secrets for so long. "The music will guide you," he said cryptically. The final movement of Sandra's lullaby added to it last night. It contains coordinates to where I've hidden the last piece of evidence, the piece that will guarantee their conviction. Then he was gone, the sound of his vehicle roaring to life drawing the attention of their attackers. Through the security feeds, they watched him lead most of the mercenary teams away from the safe house, buying them the precious minutes they needed to escape. The last image they had of Robert Mitchell showed him driving straight at a roadblock, his car weaving to dodge gunfire, leading his pursuers far from his family one final time. In the days following Robert's sacrifice, Sandra's condition deteriorated dramatically. The stress of the escape, the emotional trauma of losing Robert again, and the constant movement between safe houses took their toll on her fragile mind. Charles watched helplessly as his mother slipped further away, her moments of clarity becoming increasingly rare. The new safe house had a small upright piano, but Sandra could no longer remember how to play. Her fingers would hover over the keys, trembling, while tears rolled down her face. The music, she would whisper, "I can hear it, but I can't find it anymore." Barbara spent hours sitting with her grandmother, singing the lullabies they had shared, trying to spark some recognition. Sometimes Sandra would hum along, but more often she would stare blankly, lost in a fog that grew thicker by the day. She was so strong at the warehouse, Barbara said one evening, her young voice heavy with worry. "She saved me. She remembered everything. Why can't she remember now?" Mary explained gently, "Sometimes, when we need to be strong for the people we love, our minds can push through the fog, but it takes a toll. Like a candle burning too brightly, it lights up the darkness, but burns out faster." The doctors they secretly consulted confirmed their fears. The combination of stress, trauma, and the progression of her disease had accelerated Sandra's decline. They estimated she had weeks, maybe months, of recognizing her family. One night, Charles found his mother in the piano room at 3 a.m., trying to write music with trembling hands. The notation was jumbled, unreadable, but she worked with desperate intensity. "Mum," he said softly, "you should be resting." Sandra looked up, her eyes briefly clear. "I have to finish it, Charles. The last piece of the puzzle, Robert said it was in the music. But I can't remember how it goes, her voice broke. My music was supposed to protect our family, and now I'm losing it. Charles sat beside her on the piano bench, holding her shaking hands. You've done enough, Mom. The music kept us safe for 30 years. Let us protect you now. But Robert, she began. I would want you to rest, Charles finished gently. We'll find the evidence he hid. You taught me how to read the codes in your music. Barbara understands them too. Your legacy lives on through us. The next morning, Sandra didn't recognize Charles at all. She called him Robert, then Jonathan, becoming agitated when he tried to explain who he was. Only Barbara's presence seemed to soothe her, though she couldn't remember the girl's name. Mary took it especially hard, watching her sister fade away. We thought we had more time, she confided to Charles. After everything came to light, I thought, I hoped we could just be sisters again, even for a little while. Sandra's more lucid moments became precious gifts. During one such moment, she gripped Charles's hand with surprising strength. Promise me, she said urgently, promise me you'll keep the music alive. Not just the codes and secrets, the joy of it. The way it brings people together, heals broken things. I promise, Mom, Charles whispered, his throat tight. Barbara took to playing the piano at sunset each day, filling the safe house with gentle melodies. Sometimes Sandra would wander in, drawn by the music, and for a few brief moments they would see a glimmer of the remarkable woman who had protected H. The media storm hit with devastating force. Former allies at Harris Enterprises, desperate to save themselves, turned on Charles with vicious efficiency. Headlines screamed about the privileged heir, who destroyed his family's legacy, portraying him as an unstable, vengeful son trying to ruin his father's reputation. Victor Blackwood, despite being in custody, orchestrated a masterful PR campaign through his lawyers. Harris Enterprises has provided jobs and opportunities for thousands, his statement read. Charles Harris's reckless accusations have put all of these hard-working people's livelihoods at risk. One must question his mental state, given his mother's unfortunate condition. The betrayals cut deep. Board members Charles had known since childhood gave interviews questioning his competence. He was never the businessman his father was once stated. Always too soft, too concerned with ethics rather than results. Now he's destroyed everything Jonathan Harris built. Sarah Chen and Victoria Reynolds faced their own battles. Anonymous sources leaked personal information about them to tabloids. Sarah's teenage daughter was harassed at school. Victoria's law firm received threats from powerful clients demanding they drop her. Even David Parker, their 8 expert, wasn't spared. Fake evidence appeared suggesting he had hacked the company's systems for personal gain. His reputation in the tech community, built over decades, was systematically dismantled. The financial attacks were equally brutal. Banks suddenly called in loans. Investment partners withdrew. The charitable foundations Charles had supported began publicly distancing themselves from him. His personal accounts were frozen pending investigation of irregular activities. The worst came when medical records were leaked suggesting Charles had a history of mental instability. Carefully doctored photographs showed him visiting psychiatric facilities. Former employees were paid to tell stories about his erratic behavior and obsession with conspiracy theories. Mary intercepted most newspapers before they reached Sandra and Barbara, but couldn't shield them entirely. One morning, Barbara found a magazine with her father's photo, accompanying an article that painted him as a corrupt official who had stolen from child welfare organizations. They're lying about Daddy, she sobbed into Charles's shoulder. Why are they making him sound like a bad person? He died trying to help those children. Charles held her close, his own heart breaking. Sometimes, when bad people are afraid of the truth, they try to bury it under lies. But the truth is like your music. Barbara, it finds a way to be heard. The pressure grew as former business associates began recanting their statements supporting Charles's investigation. Even those who had privately confirmed witnessing suspicious activities now denied everything, their fear of retribution evident in their carefully worded retractions. But amidst the betrayals, unexpected allies emerged. Former employees reached out secretly, offering evidence. Families of trafficking victims began sharing their stories. Small, independent news outlets started questioning the coordinated nature of the attacks on Charles's credibility. A turning point came when one of Jonathan Harris's oldest friends, dying of cancer, gave a detailed confession to a respected journalist. He confirmed everything Charles had revealed and more, his impending death freeing him from fear of retribution. Throughout it all, Charles refused to back down or respond to the personal attacks. Every lie they tell, he explained to Barbara, every attempt to discredit us, shows how desperate they are. They wouldn't fight so hard if we weren't close to the truth. The attack came during what should have been a routine medical visit for Sandra. Despite their precautions, someone had leaked information about the appointment. As Mary escorted Barbara and Sandra from the private clinic to their secure vehicle, she noticed something that triggered 3 decades of protective instincts, a glint of metal from a nearby rooftop. Without hesitation, Mary shoved Barbara and Sandra down behind a parked car just as the first shot rang out. Pain exploded in her shoulder as she covered Barbara with her body, but she maintained her focus, drawing her own concealed weapon with her uninjured arm. "Stay down," she ordered Barbara, her voice steady despite the blood soaking through her jacket. Sandra, in her confused state, began humming one of her lullabies, the familiar melody incongruously peaceful amid the chaos. Security teams rushed from multiple directions, engaging the attackers, but Mary's only concern was getting her family to safety. She could feel her strength ebbing as she kept Barbara shielded, years of training warring with the physical limitations of her aging body. "Mary, you're bleeding so much," Barbara whispered, her eyes wide with fear. The girl tried to apply pressure to the wound, her small hands becoming stained with her protector's blood. Just a scratch, Mary managed through gritted teeth, though she knew it was far worse. The bullet had struck an artery, she could tell from the way her vision was already starting to blur. But she had sworn 30 years ago to protect this family at any cost, and she wasn't about to break that promise now. When Charles arrived minutes later, having been alerted by their security system, he found Mary still conscious but barely holding on. She refused to move or release her protective hold on Barbara until the all-clear was given, even as medical teams tried to treat her wound. "The same shoulder," she said with a weak attempt at humor as they finally loaded her into an ambulance. At least they're consistent, her previous wound from the mansion attack had barely healed, and now this new injury threatened to cause permanent damage. In the hospital, as doctors worked to repair the damage, Charles sat with Barbara in the waiting room. The girl hadn't spoken since they arrived, her clothes still stained with Mary's blood. "She knew," Barbara finally said, her voice small. "She knew the shot was coming before anyone else did, just like she knew when those men came to our house and at the warehouse. She's always known how to protect us." Charles nodded, his throat tight. "That's been her life's mission. Even before I was born, she promised to keep our family safe. She gave up everything for that promise, her identity, her chance at her own family, her entire life." The surgery took hours. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was grave. "The damage was extensive. We've repaired what we could," but he hesitated. "She'll likely never regain full use of that arm." For someone who had spent decades in constant vigilance, always ready to defend her family, this loss of physical capability was a crushing blow. Yet when they visited her in recovery, Mary's first words were about their security protocols, insisting on reviewing the breach that had led to the attack. "I can still coordinate," she said firmly, even as pain medications slurred her speech. "I have contacts, contingency plans. They won't catch us off guard again." Charles tried to persuade her to rest, to focus on her recovery, but Mary's dedication was unshakable. From her hospital bed, she continued to manage their security, making calls with her good arm, analyzing threat assessments, refusing to relinquish her role as their protector, even as her body struggled to heal. The truth emerged through the most unexpected source. A young guard at the detention center where Victor Blackwood was being held contacted Victoria Reynolds with information he couldn't keep to himself any longer. His father had been Blackwood's personal driver for 20 years, and on the night Michael Mitchell died, he had witnessed everything. Charles insisted on being present when the guard gave his statement, though Barbara waited outside with Mary. The guard's hands shook as he placed an old flip phone on the table. My father recorded everything, he explained. He couldn't live with what he saw that night. It killed him inside until the young man's voice broke. Before he took his own life, he gave me this phone and made me promise to keep it safe until the right time. The recording was grainy, but the voices were clear. Blackwood's distinctive tone cut through the night sounds. Mitchell's getting too close. He's found the connection between the adoption agencies and our transport routes. It needs to be handled tonight. Another voice responded, Jonathan Harris. Make it look like an accident. And Victor. If his investigation has backup files somewhere, find them. The recording continued, documenting the pursuit of Michael Mitchell's car, his desperate attempts to protect his daughter, and finally the deliberate collision that took his life. Blackwood had personally overseen the whole operation, ensuring there were no survivors, or so he thought. They never found Barbara, the guard explained. My father said they searched for hours. Blackwood was furious. He knew a witness could destroy everything they'd built. Charles listened as the recording captured Blackwood's cold calculation after the crash. The girl's young. Even if she survived, who would believe her? Make sure the official report shows driver fatigue. Another tragic single-car accident. Victoria took detailed notes, her legal mind already formulating how to use this evidence. But Charles was focused on something else. The date of the recording matched exactly with when Barbara had appeared near his mansion. She hadn't just randomly wandered there, she had been guided, perhaps by the same forces that had protected their family for so long. The guard had one final revelation. There's something else. The night Mitchell died, he wasn't just running blindly. My father overheard him making a phone call, trying to reach someone named Robert. He said he had proof that would bring down the whole network. Charles felt his heart stop. Robert Mitchell, his father, had been guiding Michael's investigation from the shadows. Barbara's father had been working with his own, both men fighting the same evil, neither knowing how their families would eventually unite. When Charles finally emerged from the interview room, Barbara took one look at his face and knew. You found out what happened to Daddy, didn't you? He knelt before her, taking her small hands in his. Yes, sweetheart. And I promise you, the men responsible will pay for what they did. Your father was a hero. He died trying to protect children like you, trying to expose the truth. Barbara's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. Did he suffer? No, Charles lied gently, the recording's horrible sounds still echoing in his mind. It was quick, and he never stopped trying to protect you, right until the end. That evening, as Barbara played the piano, her way of processing difficult emotions, Charles made a series of calls. The evidence from the guard would be the final nail in Blackwood's coffin, but more importantly, it validated everything they'd been fighting for. Michael Mitchell hadn't died in vain. His sacrifice had set in motion the events that would finally bring down the trafficking network. The evidence Robert Mitchell had gathered over 30 years proved devastating in its scope and detail. Working with Victoria Reynolds, Charles organized a coordinated release of information to law enforcement agencies across 3 continents. The scale of the trafficking operation stunned even those who had been investigating it. Secure servers revealed thousands of transactions, each representing a child sold into what the documents euphemistically called specialized adoption programs. The money trail led to offshore accounts belonging to some of society's most respected figures, judges who had approved questionable adoptions, politicians who had blocked investigations, charity directors who had provided cover for the operation. Look at these numbers, Sarah Chen said, reviewing financial records. Each child was assigned a value based on specific characteristics: age, appearance, nationality. They treated them like commodities on a trading floor. Her voice broke with disgust as she showed Charles a spreadsheet detailing market values for different categories of children. The investigation revealed a sophisticated network of private schools, summer camps, and youth programs that had served as fronts for the operation. Behind their respectable facades, these institutions had been assessment centers, places where children could be evaluated and priced without arousing suspicion. Barbara recognized some of the names. "That's the camp Daddy was investigating," she said quietly, pointing to a facility in the mountains. He said children went in but didn't all come out. The records showed them returning home, but they really went somewhere else. International police raids discovered holding facilities disguised as medical clinics and private boarding schools. Children were found waiting to be transported, some having been in the system for months or even years. Each rescue operation validated Robert's meticulous documentation. The most damning evidence came from the encrypted files hidden in Sandra's musical compositions. The complex codes had contained not just locations and dates, but recordings, photographs, and signed documents proving the involvement of powerful figures in business and government. Victoria's legal team worked around the clock, coordinating with prosecutors in multiple countries. The network operated like a multinational corporation, she explained during a briefing. Each region had its own hierarchy, but all roads led back to Harris Enterprises and its partners. The human cost became clear as survivors began coming forward. Adults who had been trafficked as children shared their stories, many identifying the same facilities, the same procedures in positions of authority. Their testimonies matched perfectly with Robert's documentation, creating an airtight case. Charles discovered that several of his father's most prestigious charitable initiatives had been designed specifically to identify vulnerable children. Annual awards for gifted underprivileged youth had been a way to scout potential targets. Scholarship programs had provided access to children in developing countries. "They used our reputation for philanthropy as a weapon," he told his team, his voice heavy with guilt. Every good deed the company appeared to do had a dark purpose behind it. Mary, still recovering from her wound, coordinated with Robert's old network of informants. More evidence poured in: transport schedules disguised as corporate shipping records, payoff lists hidden in annual reports, blackmail material that had kept potential whistleblowers quiet. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Sandra, in a moment of clarity, remembered a hidden safe in the mansion's music room. Behind her framed First Symphony, they found decades of correspondence between Jonathan Harris and his conspirators, including detailed instructions for manipulating adoption regulations in multiple countries. The truth about Elizabeth Harris's death emerged from Sandra's old music sheets, hidden in plain sight for decades. While organizing the evidence for prosecution, David Parker discovered a series of letters pressed between the pages of an unfinished symphony. The letters were from Elizabeth to Sandra, dated just days before her supposed accident. "I can't stay silent anymore," Elizabeth had written, with the children. "I've seen too much. Jonathan thinks I don't know what happens at those special adoption centers, but I've kept records. Everything is documented. Sandra, if anything happens to me, look behind the portrait in the East Wing study." Charles remembered Elizabeth vaguely, a kind woman who had treated him as her own son during their brief time together. Her death when he was 5 had been attributed to a car accident, another tragic single-vehicle crash on a dark road. Behind the portrait, they found Elizabeth's personal diary and a cache of photographs. She had been investigating the trafficking operation from inside the Harris household, documenting dates, names, and locations. More importantly, she had discovered the connection between Harris Enterprises and the disappeared children. "Jonathan brought me into this thinking I would be complicit," she wrote in her final entry. "He thought my position as his wife would ensure my loyalty. But how can I stay silent when I see these children torn from their families?" Tomorrow I'm taking everything to the authorities. I pray I'm making the right choice." The next day, Elizabeth Harris died in what police ruled a tragic accident. But her diary told a different story. She had known they were coming for her, had even named names. Victor Blackwood had arranged the details, using the same team that would later kill Michael Mitchell. "She was trying to save them," Barbara said softly, reading the diary entries. "Just like my daddy. And they killed her too." Mary confirmed the connection. Elizabeth had reached out to Robert for help. She was supposed to meet him the night she died to hand over her evidence. When she didn't show up, Mary's voice trailed off. That's when Robert knew how far they would go to protect their secrets. The diary revealed another shocking truth. Elizabeth had discovered that Charles was Robert's biological son. She had been planning to tell him, to help reunite him with his real father. Her death had ensured the secret remained buried for another generation. Victoria's team found forensic evidence that had been buried for decades. Elizabeth's brake lines had been cut in the same distinctive way as Michael Mitchell's car. The same signature, the same killer, separated by 25 years. "Jonathan Harris didn't just have his wife killed," Charles said, his voice tight with anger. "He used her death to strengthen his hold over our family. He made me think she was my mother, then used her tragic death to bind me closer to him." Sandra, during one of her lucid periods, confirmed the truth. "Elizabeth knew everything. She tried to help us, tried to protect you. The night she died, she called me. She said she had proof that would free us from Jonathan's control, but I was too afraid to act. Her death. It's haunted me all these years." The evidence Elizabeth had gathered, combined with her diary entries, provided crucial corroboration for Robert's documentation. Her meticulous notes matched his records exactly, proving that the trafficking operation had been running even longer than they'd initially suspected. Charles ordered a proper memorial for Elizabeth, recognizing her as another victim who had died trying to expose the truth. Her diary, with its detailed account of the trafficking operation's early days, became key evidence in the prosecution's case. The final revelation about Jonathan Harris came from a series of private journals discovered in his old study. Unlike Elizabeth's desperate diary entries or Robert's coded evidence, these journals displayed a chilling pride in the trafficking operation's efficiency. Jonathan had documented everything with the detached precision of a businessman reviewing successful investments. On a profitable Q1 entry read, "The Eastern European pipeline is exceeding expectations. Quality merchandise, minimal oversight. Local officials are quite reasonable in their compensation requirements." The clinical way he discussed children's lives made Charles physically ill. The journals revealed how Jonathan had first become involved in trafficking. It hadn't been a gradual descent into corruption. He had deliberately created the network, seeing an opportunity to profit from desperate families and vulnerable children. His legitimate adoption agencies had been covers from the very beginning. "Sandra's music school provides excellent cover," he wrote. "Society events, charity concerts, perfect venues for wealthy clients to view potential acquisitions discreetly. Her deteriorating mental state is actually advantageous. Who would suspect a confused composer of being involved in our enterprise?" The most devastating entries concerned Charles himself. "Acquiring Mitchell's son was my masterpiece," Jonathan had written. "Not only did it silence Robert's investigation, but it gave me the perfect heir, a child I could mold to eventually take over both the legitimate and shadow operations. Sandra's marriage was an unexpected bonus, completing our respectable facade." Charles discovered that his entire childhood had been carefully orchestrated. The schools he attended, the friends he was allowed to make, the values he was taught, all were part of Jonathan's plan to create an heir who would continue his dark legacy. "The boy shows troubling signs of his father's conscience," one entry noted. "Must work harder to instill proper business values. Sentiment has no place in our operation." This was followed by detailed plans to isolate Charles from any influences that might develop his natural empathy. Barbara, who had been helping organize the evidence, found photos that made the manipulation even clearer. They showed Jonathan carefully staging seemingly candid father-son moments, all designed to strengthen his control over Charles. Each genuine smile, each proud moment Charles remembered, had been calculated for effect. He wasn't just evil, Charles told Mary as they reviewed the journals. He was proud of his evil. He saw it as a testament to his business acumen, his ability to see opportunities others were too moral to exploit. The journals also revealed why Jonathan had allowed Sandra to keep playing her coded compositions at corporate events. "Let Mitchell think he's clever with his musical ciphers," he wrote. "As long as we control the performance venues, his messages only reach those we allow. Sometimes the appearance of resistance can be useful in identifying potential problems." Most shocking were the detailed contingency plans Jonathan had left in case of his death. Pages of instructions for Blackwood and others, explaining how to maintain control over Charles, how to gradually draw him into the trafficking operation, how to use his inherited guilt over Sandra's condition to manipulate him. In the end, Charles told Victoria, who was preparing to present the journals as evidence. Jonathan Harris's meticulous record-keeping became his operation's downfall. He documented everything, thinking his power would protect him forever. He never imagined his own words would help destroy everything he built. The final entry, written just days before Jonathan's death, showed no remorse, no recognition of the lives he had destroyed. Instead, it contained a cold assessment of future expansion opportunities and a satisfied review of his legacy. He died believing his empire would continue through the son he had stolen and tried to corrupt. The verdicts came down like thunderbolts across 3 continents. In coordinated proceedings, courts in 12 countries simultaneously convicted key members of the trafficking network. Victor Blackwood, the first to face justice, received multiple life sentences with no possibility of parole. Today marks the end of one of the largest trafficking operations in history, the lead prosecutor announced on the courthouse steps. Thanks to the courage of Charles Harris, the dedication of Robert Mitchell, and the sacrifice of countless others, these criminals will never harm another child. Inside the courtroom, Charles sat with Barbara, Mary, and a frail but present Sandra as Blackwood was led away in chains. The man who had orchestrated so much suffering, who had killed Barbara's father and Elizabeth Harris, finally showed emotion, not remorse, but rage at being exposed and defeated. The evidence proved irrefutable. Sandra's musical codes, Robert's decades of documentation, Elizabeth's diary, Jonathan's journals, and Michael Mitchell's investigations created an airtight case. One by one, corrupt officials, business leaders, and facilitators were identified and prosecuted. International task forces raided holding facilities, freeing hundreds of children. Each rescue validated the evidence Charles and his allies had gathered. Families torn apart by the trafficking ring were reunited. Those who couldn't be reunited were placed with carefully vetted foster families, their safety and well-being closely monitored. Harris Enterprises underwent a complete transformation. Under Charles's direction, the company's resources were redirected to support anti-trafficking initiatives and child welfare programs. The legitimate adoption agencies were reformed, their procedures restructured to ensure transparency and ethical practices. "We can't undo the past," Charles told the board of directors, now composed entirely of new members committed to reform. "But we can work to create a future where no child experiences what these victims endured." Victoria Reynolds established a legal foundation dedicated to supporting trafficking survivors and their families. Sarah Chen developed financial oversight systems to prevent similar criminal networks from operating through corporate channels. Their work became a model for corporate accountability worldwide. The most personal victory came when Barbara testified at Blackwood's sentencing. Standing brave and tall despite her young age, she faced her father's killer and told the court about the night her life changed forever. Her testimony, combined with the evidence from the driver's recording, ensured Blackwood would never see freedom again. As the verdicts were read, Mary squeezed Charles's hand with her good arm. Robert would be proud, she whispered. This is everything he fought for, everything he sacrificed to achieve. Sandra, in a moment of clarity, watched the proceedings with tears streaming down her face. The music protected the truth, she said softly, until you were ready to hear it. The breakthrough in Sandra's condition came unexpectedly during a routine music therapy session. Barbara had been playing one of Sandra's old compositions when suddenly the elderly woman's hands moved to the piano, joining her granddaughter in perfect harmony. For the first time in months, she played without hesitation or confusion. Dr. Emily Richardson, a specialist in music therapy for Alzheimer's patients, developed a unique program centered around Sandra's own compositions. Music engages parts of the brain that remain relatively preserved, she explained to Charles. Your mother's connection to these particular pieces runs extremely deep. They've been part of her survival strategy for decades. The daily sessions became a family affair. Barbara would start playing, then Sandra would join in, and gradually memories would surface. Not just musical memories, but real conversations, moments of genuine connection. While she still had difficult days, the fog seemed to lift more frequently during these musical interludes. It's like the music creates a bridge, Mary observed, watching her sister work through complex pieces she had composed years ago. When she's playing, she's not just remembering the notes, she's remembering who she is. Sandra began composing again, simple pieces at first, then increasingly complex ones. Unlike her earlier work, these compositions contained no hidden codes or secret messages. They were pure expressions of emotion, of family, of healing. Barbara would sit beside her for hours, learning each new piece, their musical connection growing stronger by the day. The most moving moment came when Sandra composed a new lullaby for Barbara. This one has no secrets, she told her granddaughter clearly. Just loved the piece combined elements of her original lullaby for Charles with new themes that spoke of hope and renewal. Charles converted part of their new home into a music room filled with instruments and recording equipment. Sandra spent most of her lucid moments there, surrounded by the thing that had helped her protect her family for so long. Now, instead of hiding messages in her music, she used it to strengthen the bonds between them. Other families affected by the trafficking ring began visiting, drawn by reports of Sandra's music therapy success. She would play for them, and something in her compositions seemed to help them process their trauma. The music room became a place of healing, not just for Sandra, but for all who entered it. Music remembers, Sandra would say during her clear moments, even when we forget. It holds our truth, our pain, our love, everything we are. These moments of wisdom, though still interspersed with periods of confusion, showed a woman slowly finding her way back to herself. While the doctors cautioned that her improvement wasn't to cure the underlying disease, remained the music therapy gave Sandra longer periods of clarity and connection with her family. It was enough. After decades of using music to protect secrets, she could finally use it simply to express joy. The transformation of Harris Enterprises began with a name change. In a symbolic break from the past, Charles renamed it Mitchell Foundation for Children, dedicating its resources to protecting and supporting vulnerable youth worldwide. The corporation's vast network of international connections, once used for trafficking, was repurposed to create a global child protection system. The former adoption agencies were completely restructured, with triple-layered oversight and transparency requirements that set new industry standards. We're not just changing policies, Charles announced to the newly appointed board. We're changing the entire culture. Every decision, every program, every initiative must answer one question: does this protect children? The board, carefully selected from child welfare experts and survivors advocates, embraced this mission wholeheartedly. Sarah Chen developed a revolutionary financial monitoring system that could detect patterns suggesting trafficking operations. The software, made freely available to law enforcement agencies worldwide, helped identify and prevent dozens of attempted trafficking schemes in its first year. The foundation established rehabilitation centers in key locations globally, providing safe havens for rescued children. These centers offered comprehensive support medical care, psychological counseling, educational opportunities, and most importantly, help reuniting with their families when possible. Barbara played a crucial role in designing the center's programs. Drawing from her own experience, she insisted on including music therapy rooms in every facility. "Music helped me heal," she explained to the board. "It can help other children too." Her insight proved invaluable. The music therapy programs became one of the most successful aspects of the rehabilitation process. The old Harris Enterprises office tower was converted into a community center, its lower floors housing free childcare facilities for working parents, after-school programs, and family support services. The upper floors became a training center for child welfare professionals and law enforcement specialists. Charles established a whistleblower protection program, ensuring that employees who reported suspicious activities would be protected and supported. The program was named the Elizabeth Harris Memorial Fund in honor of his adoptive mother, who had died trying to expose the truth. Most significantly, the foundation created a worldwide database of missing children, using advanced technology to track and match cases across borders. This system, which would have saved Barbara's father years of investigation, became a crucial tool for law enforcement agencies fighting trafficking. "We're taking everything they used for evil," Charles explained to Mary as they reviewed the Foundation's first-year impact report and turning it into instruments of protection and healing. Every corporate resource, every international connection, every bit of influence, it's all being redirected to save children. The Foundation's success inspired other corporations to examine their own practices more closely. Charles's story of transformation from unwitting inheritor of corruption to architect of change became a case study in corporate responsibility. Business schools began teaching the Mitchell Foundation's reform process as a model for ethical organizational transformation. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the smallest a children's choir now practiced in the building's lobby every afternoon, their songs echoing through the same halls where trafficking deals had once been quietly arranged. The sound of their voices, free and joyful, was a daily reminder of why their work mattered. 1 year after the trials ended, Charles hosted a gathering at their new home, a warm, sunlit house filled with music instead of secrets. The occasion was Barbara's official adoption ceremony, but it became something more, a celebration of family, both blood-related and chosen. The music room was the heart of the celebration. Sandra, having one of her good days, sat at the piano with Barbara, playing a new piece they had composed together. Mary, her injured arm finally healing, watched from her favorite armchair, her role shifting from protector to beloved aunt. The room filled with the kind of joy that only music and love could create. Survivors from the Foundation's rehabilitation centers performed a concert, their voices rising in songs of hope and healing. Among them were children Barbara had helped through music therapy, each one representing a life reclaimed from darkness. Their presence transformed what could have been a somber reminder of the past into a testament to the power of resilience. "Family isn't just about blood," Charles said in his speech, looking around at the gathered faces. "It's about the bonds we choose to forge, the love we choose to give, the trust we choose to build. Every person in this room is family because we've shared not just trauma, but healing." Sandra surprised everyone by standing to speak, one of her increasingly frequent moments of clarity. "The music that once carried our secrets," she said, "her voice strong, now carries our joy. And that's a much better melody." She then played the new lullaby she had composed for Barbara, its notes speaking of love and belonging rather than fear and hiding. Mary, who had spent decades in the shadows, finally stepped into her rightful place as a beloved family member. Her dedication to protecting them had cost her greatly, but now she could simply be Aunt Mary, loved and cherished for who she was rather than what she could do for them. Photos of Robert and Michael Mitchell held places of honor, remembering the fathers who had sacrificed everything to protect their children and expose the truth. Barbara placed fresh flowers beneath their pictures daily, a gesture that spoke of both remembrance and moving forward. The foundation's success meant that their family continued to grow. Children who had been rescued, families who had been reunited, staff members who had become more than employees all became part of their extended circle. The house that had once felt too big for just Charles and Sandra now buzzed with life and laughter. As the evening drew to a close, Barbara gathered everyone in the music room for a special performance. She had composed a piece telling their family's story, not the story of tragedy and loss, but of love, courage, and redemption. As she played, each note seemed to heal another wound, bridge another gap, strengthen another bond. Charles watched his daughter play, surrounded by their unconventional but deeply loving family. He saw Mary wiping away tears of joy, Sandra beaming with grandmother's pride, and the faces of so many others who had become part of their journey of healing. This was their legacy now, not the dark empire Jonathan Harris had built, but a family forged through adversity, strengthened by love, and dedicated to bringing light where there had been darkness. The music that had once hidden their secrets now proclaimed their truth: love heals, family matters, and hope always finds a way. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of love, redemption, and the power of family. We hope Charles and Barbara's story has touched your heart and reminded you that hope can flourish even in the darkest times. If you found meaning in their story, please share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. Your perspective matters to us, and we'd love to hear how this story resonated with you. Support our team by subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button. Each subscription helps us continue creating meaningful content that explores the depths of human emotion and resilience. Share this video with friends and family who might find comfort or inspiration in this story of healing and unconditional love. Together, let's build a community that celebrates the power of storytelling and the enduring strength of the human spirit.